So now thinking about your thesis statement, what goes into it, what should your thesis statement look like or sound like? Well, first you need to identify the causal relationship that you are explaining. Are you looking at what caused something, or are you looking at the effects of something? So if you're writing an essay about the causes, you want to clearly identify what they are and what they caused. Okay, we have a topic sentence there. Marriages fail because some couples are unable to cope with life's crises or outside pressures and are unable to communicate with each other about these problems. Okay, the idea that marriages fail, that is the event or the problem that's created that we're going to talk about. The causes for marriage failure are inability to cope with life's crises or pressures, inability to communicate. So we've got two causes that would be explored in that essay. Now, if we were writing an essay about the effects, you're going to identify the initial cause and then the multiple, the domino, the effects after that cause. So we have the growth of the internet has enabled people to connect on a global level, but it has also blurred the boundaries between personal and public information. So we have our starting event, the growth of the internet, and then we have the effects of that. Okay, people connect on a global level. We have blurred boundaries between personal and public information. So again, just two causes listed there. But your thesis statement is going to look somewhat formulaic like this, where we clearly identify either the cause, either the event and then the things that caused it, or the inciting event, the cause, and then the effects that have been created from that situation. All right, and now finally into our content. How do we establish these things? And how do we write an effective essay? First of all, as with always with your introduction, you want to think about getting the reader's attention using a fact, an emotional example, a quote from a source. If we think back to the idea of the Patriot Act or 9/11, a short introductory paragraph that is maybe a narrative about some of the events that day, and then follow that with your more academic paragraph that actually establishes the focus of the paper and gives your thesis statement. That would be something that could be effective. Just remember, that it is possible at this level to have an introductory paragraph that is more than just one paragraph. You might need a couple to really get the whole thing established. Then you think about explaining the issue in the introduction. We need to understand that situation. Do not assume that we are as familiar with the idea of, say, the Patriot Act or Title IX legislation or the growing number of juveniles being tried as adults, or whatever your event or problem or legislation is. You need to make sure that we get kind of a crash course in it so that we can understand what you're discussing. And then you lay out for us the thesis. Are you going to be identifying the causes, or are you going to be showing us the effects of this particular situation? Now, in the body, you want to use facts to support your claims. This can come from ethos. Okay, this can come from experts in the field. Again, making sure that they are credible, that their field of expertise does actually relate to what you are discussing. This can be the use of logos. Okay, different studies or statistics, research-focused outcomes. And you can even look at pathos as a type of fact. If we're talking about personal experiences, people who have been interviewed or who have written about their direct experiences, we don't want secondhand information, but direct experiences would be acceptable. You do want to try to avoid bias, whether in your writing or if you come across it in your sources. understand that that doesn't mean you have to abandon that source, but you might want to acknowledge their bias in your essay at some point, showing that yes, you recognize it, however, that they do still have some valid points that you can use. Okay, so a bias statement would sound something like this. The American public is too blind to see that the death penalty is wrong. Voter ignorance is one contributing factor that allows policies like the death penalty to come into law. You could be insulting to your audience with this. If your audience is maybe leaning more towards the death penalty, calling them ignorant isn't going to get them to read the rest of your paper or be interested in what you have to say. So being a little bit more objective can entice the reader, or at least keep them from becoming immediately hostile to you. So a better sentence might be, more death penalty education is needed to provide the voting public with the information to make informed decisions. Okay, so think about bias as you are writing. Remember that we're writing in formal voice here. Not until your final argument paper do you get to bring in the I statements. So it would be wrong to say, I believe that the death penalty is wrong because it is a state-sanctioned form of murder. It would be correct to just make that a direct statement. The death penalty is wrong because it is a state-sanctioned form of murder. So if you find yourself starting to write, I think, or I believe, or in my opinion, just skip over that in your head. Mentally in your head, write it, but don't actually type it on your screen, and then start typing with whatever comes after that phrase, and you should be just fine. Now, you want to think about, I mentioned this before, thinking about the importance of your causes or your effects. With your causes, I think it's important that you think about what's necessary, what's the most important. Without this, there's no way anything else would happen. You want to think about secondary or sufficient causes. It might produce the effect that you want, but it might not be enough by itself. Okay, a necessary cause is always going to be enough by itself to produce this effect. Sufficient cause might be able to produce this all by itself. And then a contributory cause. Okay, it could produce this effect, but it wasn't enough by itself. So if we think about the Patriot Act, the necessary cause, you might be able to say, was the terrorist attacks and the fear that that generated. That alone was enough to inspire the legislation. Contributory causes, you might go back to the idea of I'm not sure, the FBI wanting more leeway in tracking terrorists. I'm sure that they did, but on its own, that wasn't going to get them this legislation. Okay, so think about in your structure, do I want to talk about my necessary cause first and then go back to the others, or do I want to build towards the necessary cause? Do I want to start with, well, these are contributing factors, and then finally, this was the ultimate catalyst. This was the thing that was really what created the situation as we're looking at it now. As you're revising your essay, these are some important questions to ask yourself. Have I gotten too narrow? Have I assumed that there's only one cause when there are actually multiple layers to that or multiple other causes to think about? Have I made a logical error in assuming that there's a relationship just because there was a time relationship? Okay, remember not to confuse cause and effect with chronology. Did I distinguish between long-term or short-term? That's the idea again of the immediate versus the secondary. And with effects especially, you might look at what was an immediate effect of something versus, as this situation continues, what are going to be some of the longer lasting long-term effects. Okay, so short-term is single, it's immediately identifiable, but a long-term might be harder to identify if we're looking at longer-term causes of something. Then we might have to go farther back in time to understand them, but they might be just as, if not more important in understanding the situation. And have I distinguished between what's the primary effect or cause and what's a secondary or less important effect or cause. So as you are approaching your cause and effect essay, keep these ideas in mind. Think about the idea that you are trying to show us a relationship and that you need to be able to prove that relationship with the research that you have been conducting on your topic.